The text message arrived at exactly 11:47 p.m. on December 15th, cutting through the quiet of my small apartment like a blade through silk. Christmas is family only this year. You wouldn't understand. Don't come. No signature needed. I knew my father's cold efficiency anywhere. Colonel Elena Martinez, decorated combat veteran, Bronze Star recipient, commander of 300 Marines, reduced to staring at 12 words that felt like a court-martial verdict. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was born Elena Sofia Rodriguez in a house that smelled permanently of gun oil and disappointment. My father, Master Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, had served 2 tours in Iraq and came home carrying more than just his duffel bag. He brought back a silence that filled every corner of our Phoenix home, a heaviness that pressed down on family dinners and birthday celebrations alike. My mother, Isabella, was a school nurse who wore her hair in perfect buns and kept her voice soft even when my father's drinking turned the evenings dark. The first time I mentioned wanting to join the military, I was 14, sitting at our kitchen table doing homework while he cleaned his service pistol with methodical precision. "I want to be like you, Papa," I said, looking up from my algebra textbook. The cleaning rod froze in his hands. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much desert sand and too much blood, and said simply, "No daughter of mine will carry a rifle. That's not what women are for." My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand, but she didn't contradict him. She never did. In our house, his word was law, his silence was punishment, and his approval was something I learned to stop seeking because it never came. When my girlfriends talked about their fathers teaching them to drive or taking them to baseball games, I stayed quiet. My father taught me to fold laundry to military precision and to never expect him to show up. High school was my escape route, though I didn't know it yet. I played volleyball, ran track and maintained a 4.2 GPA while working weekends at Mrs. Chen's restaurant downtown. The work was hard, the hours long, but it kept me out of the house and gave me something my father's disapproval couldn't touch: independence. Mrs. Chen used to watch me scrub tables with the same intensity most kids saved for video games, and shake her head. "Misha," she'd say in her accented English, "you work like you're running from something." She wasn't wrong. I was running from the weight of never being enough, from the suffocating certainty that nothing I did would ever matter, to the man whose respect I craved most. When college acceptance letters started arriving, I applied to everywhere, including the Naval Academy. I didn't tell my parents about that one. The thick envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while my father was at work, and my mother was tending her small garden behind the house. My hands shook as I read the words. "Congratulations, Miss Rodriguez. You have been accepted." I ran outside to find my mother kneeling beside her tomato plants, soil dark under her fingernails. "Mama, I got in," I whispered, holding the letter like it might disappear. She read it twice, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "Your father," she began, but I cut her off. "I know," I said, "but I'm going anyway." The fight that followed lasted 3 days. Not shouting or throwing things, because that wasn't my father's way. Just ice-cold disappointment that filled every room I entered. He stopped speaking to me entirely, addressing any necessary communication through my mother. "Tell Elena dinner is ready. Tell Elena to turn off the music. Tell Elena she's making a mistake that will ruin her life." On the morning I left for Annapolis, my mother hugged me tight enough to crack ribs and whispered, "You are stronger than any storm, Misha. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me load my single suitcase into Mrs. Chen's borrowed car. I waited for him to say something, anything. Instead, he turned and walked back into the house, closing the door with a finality that echoed for years. Plebe year at the Naval Academy was designed to break you down and rebuild you into something harder. For most of my classmates, it was a shock to their systems. For me, it felt familiar. I'd been living under inspection my entire life, walking on eggshells, proving myself worthy of basic acknowledgement. The difference was that here, at least, there were clear standards. Excel at academics, excel at physical training, excel at leadership, and you earned respect. It was a transaction I understood. What I didn't anticipate was how being one of only 37 women in a class of 1,200 would feel like carrying a spotlight everywhere I went. Every stumble was magnified, every success questioned. When I aced my first seamanship exam, a classmate muttered loud enough for others to hear, "Bet she studied with the instructor." When I finished second in our company's physical fitness test, another suggested I must have had help with the standards. I learned to let their words bounce off me like rain on a windshield. I studied harder, trained longer, and spoke less. My roommate, Jennifer Park from Sacramento, was the daughter of 2 doctors who expected perfection and delivered care packages filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes of encouragement. She'd watch me organize my sparse belongings, the few letters from my mother carefully preserved in a small wooden box, and ask, "Don't your parents write?" "My mother does," I'd answer, which was true but incomplete. My father's silence had followed me 3,000 miles east. A constant reminder that even here, excelling beyond every expectation, I was still not enough for the man whose approval had shaped my entire childhood. Second year brought new challenges and small victories. I was selected for the crew team, my shoulders and back growing strong from countless hours on the Severn River, oars cutting through water in perfect rhythm with my teammates. I discovered I had a gift for languages, mastering Spanish and Arabic with a fluency that impressed even the native speakers among the faculty. My grades ranked in the top 15% of my class, but it was during a summer training cruise aboard the USS Leyte Gulf that I found what I was truly meant to do. We were conducting boarding exercises in the Caribbean when word came through that a commercial fishing vessel had sent out a distress call. Pirates had attacked them 40 miles south of our position. The captain ordered us to respond, and I found myself part of a boarding party tasked with securing the vessel and providing medical aid to the crew. The scene we encountered was chaos. 3 fishermen were wounded, one critically with a gunshot to the abdomen. The pirates had fled, but they'd left behind destruction and terror. While my classmates focused on securing the scene, I found myself kneeling beside the wounded man, using my limited medical training to apply pressure to his wound and keep him conscious until the corpsman arrived. "What's your name?" I asked him in Spanish, his native language, his eyes focused on mine, fear giving way to something like hope. "Carlos," he whispered. "My daughter. She's getting married next month." "I have to." "You're going to make it to that wedding," I told him, maintaining pressure on the wound while the helicopter approached. "I promise you'll dance at her reception." He did make it. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation from Carlos Mendoza and his daughter Maria. Inside was a photo of him walking her down the aisle, healthy and whole. It was the first time I truly understood what service meant, not the honor or the uniform or the recognition, but the quiet satisfaction of being there when someone needed you most. My junior year brought leadership positions and new responsibilities. I was selected as company commander, responsible for the discipline and welfare of 120.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Midshipman. It meant early morning inspections, late-night counseling sessions, and the constant balancing act of being firm but fair. Some of the men under my command tested my authority at first, pushing boundaries to see if I'd crack. I didn't. When Midshipman Thompson showed up to formation with an improperly tied necktie for the 3rd time in a week, I assigned him extra duty that included learning to tie every knot in the seamanship manual. When Midshipman Garcia was caught drinking off campus, violating academy policy, I sat with him for 2 hours discussing the difference between making a mistake and making a choice, then recommended counseling instead of dismissal. My approach was different from the male company commanders, who often ruled through intimidation or camaraderie. I ruled through competence and consistency. I didn't try to be one of the guys, because I wasn't. I was something else entirely. A leader who happened to be a woman, not a woman trying to be a leader. The Academy's leadership recognized the difference too. During my senior year, I was selected as Brigade Operations Officer, the 2nd highest ranking position in the entire brigade. It came with 4 stripes on my uniform and the responsibility of coordinating training and operations for all 4,000 midshipmen. I was the first woman to hold the position in the Academy's history. The day the appointment was announced, my mother called, her voice bright with pride. "Mija. Mrs. Chen saw it in the paper. The whole neighborhood is talking about it." I could hear my father in the background, the sound of his chair creaking as he shifted. "Is Papa there?" I asked. "Yes, but—" My mother's voice trailed off. I knew that silence. I'd lived with it for 4 years. "It's okay, Mama," I said. I understand, but I didn't understand, not really. How could someone who dedicated his life to service be unable to acknowledge his daughter doing the same? How could someone who understood sacrifice be unwilling to sacrifice his pride for his child's happiness? The questions followed me through graduation, where I stood 3rd in my class, through my commissioning as a 2nd lieutenant in the Marine Corps, through my assignment to officer candidate school at Quantico. The Marines were different from the Navy, harder, more direct, less willing to accommodate anyone who couldn't keep up regardless of gender. I thrived in the environment. My company commander, Captain Janet Morrison, was a compact woman with steel-gray eyes and a reputation for excellence that preceded her into every room. She became the mentor I'd never had, pushing me harder than I thought I could be pushed. "Rodriguez," she said during my first week, "you've got the academy polish, but this isn't about looking good in dress blues. This is about leading Marines in places where mistakes get people killed. Are you ready for that responsibility?" I was. My first deployment took me to Afghanistan's Helmand province, where I led a platoon of 40 Marines in a region where the Taliban had been operating freely for months. Our mission was to establish a forward operating base and begin disrupting enemy supply lines. It meant long patrols through terrain that could hide an ambush behind every rock formation, sleepless nights monitoring radio communications, and the constant weight of knowing that every decision I made could mean the difference between my Marines coming home safely or not at all. 3 weeks into the deployment, we were conducting a routine patrol when our lead vehicle struck an improvised explosive device. The blast flipped the Humvee and trapped 2 of my Marines inside. I was in the second vehicle, 50 meters back, when the world exploded in smoke and fire. Training took over. I coordinated medical evacuation, established a security perimeter, and personally helped extract my wounded Marines from the wreckage. Lance Corporal David Kim had a concussion and a broken arm. Private First Class Marcus Johnson wasn't as lucky. Shrapnel from the blast had severed an artery in his leg, and he was losing blood faster than our combat medic could replace it. I held pressure on the wound while calling for immediate evacuation, talking to Johnson to keep him conscious while his life leaked out onto the Afghan sand. "Lieutenant," he whispered, his voice weak but steady. "My mom. Tell her I wasn't scared." "You're going to tell her yourself," I said, applying more pressure to the wound. "You're going to walk off that medevac helicopter and call her tonight." The helicopter arrived 8 minutes later, but it felt like hours. Johnson survived, though he lost his leg below the knee. He sent me a photo from his wedding 2 years later, standing proud in his dress blues, with his prosthetic hidden beneath perfectly pressed trousers. That deployment earned me a Bronze Star and the respect of Marines who'd initially viewed me with skepticism. But more importantly, it taught me something about leadership that no classroom or training exercise could. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to let the people counting on you give up hope. I returned from Afghanistan as a first lieutenant with a combat record and a reputation for competence under fire. My next assignment was to Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, where I was tasked with training new officers in counterinsurgency tactics. It meant translating battlefield experience into classroom instruction, helping young Marines understand not just how to fight, but how to think about fighting. The work was rewarding but different from field command. Instead of leading patrols, I was leading discussions about rules of engagement and cultural sensitivity. Instead of coordinating with Afghan interpreters, I was coordinating with civilian contractors and Pentagon officials. It was important work, but I found myself missing the clarity of deployment, the sense that every action had immediate and measurable consequences. That changed when I was selected for the Marine Corps Command and Staff College at Quantico. The 10-month program was designed to prepare officers for senior leadership positions, covering everything from strategic planning to resource management. My classmates were the rising stars of their respective services, men and women who distinguished themselves in Iraq, Afghanistan, and bases around the world. For the first time since the academy, I wasn't the only woman in the room, though we were still vastly outnumbered. The curriculum was intense, the expectations higher than anything I'd experienced. We studied historic campaigns, analyzed intelligence reports, and participated in war games that simulated everything from humanitarian crises to full-scale invasions. It was during one of these exercises that I met Colonel Sarah Bennett, the first woman to command a Marine infantry regiment. She was guest lecturing on leadership in combat when she made an observation that stuck with me. Excellence has no gender, but it does have a standard. The question isn't whether you're good enough to be here as a woman. The question is whether you're good enough to be here as a Marine. After the lecture, she approached me. "Captain Rodriguez," she said, "I've been following your career. You've got the skills and the experience to go far in this corps, but you need to decide what far means to you. Are you content being a very good company-grade officer, or do you want to be a general officer who changes how we think about leadership?" The question haunted me for weeks. I'd spent so much of my career focused on proving I belonged that I'd never seriously considered where I wanted that belonging to take me. Did I want to command a battalion? A regiment? Did I want to work in the Pentagon, shaping policy that would affect thousands of Marines? For the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond just surviving and succeeding to actually leading. My performance at Command and Staff College earned me early promotion to Major and assignment as Executive Officer of 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. It was a significant step up in responsibility, serving as second in command to 800 Marines across 4 companies. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Torres, was a Mustang officer who'd enlisted as a private and worked his way up through the ranks over 20 years. "Major Rodriguez," he said during our first meeting, "I don't care that you're a woman, and I don't care that you went to the academy. What I care about is whether you can help me turn this battalion into the most effective fighting force in the Marine Corps. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," I replied, and meant it. The next 18 months were the most challenging and rewarding of my military career. I oversaw training exercises that prepared our Marines for deployment, managed logistics that kept 800 people fed, housed, and equipped, and served as the commander's principal advisor on everything from personnel issues to operational planning. When Lieutenant Colonel Torres was promoted and transferred, I was selected to serve as acting battalion commander until his replacement arrived. For 6 weeks, I commanded 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. It wasn't official, wasn't permanent, and wasn't the kind of assignment that would appear in the history books. But for 42 days, 800 Marines followed my orders, trusted my judgment, and executed my vision for what our unit could become. We conducted the most successful training exercise in the battalion's recent history, earned commendations from division headquarters, and maintained the highest retention rate in the regiment. When the new battalion commander arrived, he kept me as his executive officer and relied heavily on my institutional knowledge and relationships with the junior officers. "Major Rodriguez," he said after his first month, "I've commanded 3 different units, and I've never seen an XO with your level of tactical knowledge and leadership presence. You need to be thinking about battalion command, because this corps needs officers like you in positions of real authority." The path to battalion command led through a series of increasingly responsible positions. I served as operations officer for 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit, coordinating training and deployment schedules for 2,200 Marines and sailors. I completed a master's degree in strategic studies through the Marine Corps War College, writing my thesis on gender integration in combat units. First commanded Marine Corps Security Forces at Naval Station Norfolk, responsible for the protection of critical naval infrastructure and personnel. Each assignment brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove that competence transcends gender, that leadership is about character and capability, rather than conformity to traditional expectations. I earned my lieutenant colonel's Silver Oak Leaves at 34, making me one of the youngest officers to achieve that rank in recent Marine Corps history. But with each promotion, each new responsibility, the silence from home grew heavier. My mother continued to write, her letters filled with pride and local news. But my father's absence from those communications became more noticeable. When I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, she mentioned that he'd heard about it from someone at the VFW. When I took command of a training regiment, she said he'd kept the newspaper article but hadn't commented on it. I stopped asking about him directly. The rejection was a familiar weight by now, something I'd learned to carry without letting it slow me down. But it still hurt, particularly during moments that should have been celebrations. When I received the Meritorious Service Medal for my work at Norfolk, I stood in the receiving line afterward, accepting congratulations from colleagues and superiors, and realized I was the only officer present without family in attendance. That night, alone in my quarters, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of his absence, not just from the ceremony, but from my entire adult life. He'd missed my graduation from the academy, my commissioning, my first deployment, my return from combat, every promotion and achievement that had defined my career. His silence had become the soundtrack to my success, a constant reminder that being the best version of myself still wasn't enough for the man whose approval had shaped my earliest ambitions. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November. My mother's voice was smaller than usual, strained in a way that immediately commanded my attention. "Misha, your father had a heart attack. He's in the hospital." I was on a plane to Phoenix within 4 hours, my command duties handed off to my deputy for the indefinite future. The cardiac intensive care unit at Banner Desert Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and fear. My father lay unconscious in the bed, machines monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, the harsh lines of his face softened by illness and medication. My mother sat beside him, holding his hand and whispering prayers in Spanish. "How long has he been like this?" I asked, still wearing my dress blue uniform from the morning's ceremony I'd left early. "Since yesterday," she replied. "The doctors say his heart is very weak." "They don't know." Her voice broke and I pulled her close, letting her cry against my shoulder while the machines beeped their mechanical rhythm. For 3 days I maintained a bedside vigil, watching my father fight for life with the same stubborn determination that had defined our relationship. My mother went home to rest and shower, but I stayed, studying his face for signs of consciousness, waiting for the moment his eyes would open and he would see me there. On the 4th day he woke up. His eyes found mine across the small room, confusion giving way to recognition and then something I couldn't quite identify. "Elena," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "You came." "Of course I came, Papa," I said, moving closer to his bed. "I'm your daughter." He studied my uniform, the silver oak leaves on my collar, the ribbons on my chest that told the story of a career he'd never acknowledged. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said, reading my rank insignia. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Yes, Papa." "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps." For a long moment, we looked at each other across 20 years of silence and misunderstanding. Then, with effort that obviously cost him, he raised his right hand in a weak but unmistakable salute. I returned it immediately, crisp and formal, the way he'd taught me when I was 7 years old and playing in his old uniform shirts. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About everything." Those 4 words carried the weight of 2 decades, the accumulated mass of every slight and silence, every missed opportunity for connection and pride. They didn't erase the hurt or magically repair our relationship, but they were a beginning. For the first time since I was 14 years old, my father had acknowledged not just my existence, but my worth. He recovered slowly, spending 2 weeks in the hospital, followed by months of cardiac rehabilitation. I used accumulated leave to stay in Phoenix, helping my mother manage his care while gradually rebuilding a relationship I'd given up hope of ever having. We didn't talk about the years of silence directly, but we began to fill the present with conversations about my career, my responsibilities, my hope for the future. "Why Marines?" he asked one afternoon, while doing his prescribed walking exercise in their neighborhood. "The Navy would have been safer, more predictable." "Because Marines go first," I said. "When there's trouble, when there's danger, when someone needs help, Marines go first. You taught me that service means being willing to sacrifice for others." He stopped walking and looked at me with something approaching pride. "You're a better Marine than I ever was a soldier," he said. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I returned to duty 6 weeks later with a new understanding of forgiveness, both giving and receiving it. My father and I began exchanging emails, short at first but gradually growing longer as we learned how to communicate as adults. He asked questions about my work, my Marines, my plans for advancement. I shared stories from deployments and training exercises, the daily challenges and small victories that filled my professional life. When I was selected for promotion to colonel, he was the first person I called. "Congratulations, Colonel Rodriguez," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "When's the ceremony?" "Next month at Quantico," I replied. "Will you?" "We'll be there," he said before I could finish the question. "Your mother is already planning what to wear." The promotion ceremony was everything I'd imagined such moments could be. My parents sat in the front row, my father wearing his old dress uniform, updated with current ribbons and properly fitted for his older frame. When the commanding general called my name and I stepped forward to receive my eagles, I heard him whisper, "That's my daughter." After the ceremony, during the reception, something extraordinary happened. Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, one of the highest-ranking women in the Marine Corps, approached our small family group. She was an imposing figure, a combat veteran with multiple deployments and a reputation for excellence that extended far beyond the Corps. "Colonel Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand, "I've heard excellent things about your leadership and tactical acumen. I understand you're being considered for battalion command." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, suddenly aware that this conversation could shape the next phase of my career. "I am honored to be under consideration." She turned to my father, studying his uniform and the ribbons that identified him as a combat veteran. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, reading his rank insignia, "you should be very proud of your daughter. Officers like her are why the Marine Corps remains the finest fighting force in the world." My father straightened to attention, decades of military bearing taking over. "Thank you, ma'am. I am proud. Very proud." It was the first time he'd said those words about me in public, the first time he'd claimed me as his daughter in front of his peers. The moment felt like a doorway opening, 20 years of silence finally giving way to acknowledgement and acceptance. General Hayes continued, "Colonel Rodriguez will be taking command of 1st Battalion, 8th Marines next month. It's one of our most prestigious infantry commands, typically reserved for our most promising field-grade officers." She looked at me directly. "The assumption is that officers who excel in that position are being prepared for senior leadership, potentially flag rank." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but I found myself focused on my father's expression. Pride, certainly, but also something deeper, understanding. For the first time, he seemed to grasp not just what I did for a living, but what it meant. The responsibility, the honor, the trust that thousands of Marines would place in my judgment and leadership. As we prepared to leave the reception, he pulled me aside. "Elena," he said, "I owe you an apology. Not just for missing your ceremonies, but for missing your life. You became the kind of officer, the kind of leader, that I always hoped to be but never achieved. I'm sorry I was too stubborn and too proud to see that earlier." "Papa," I replied, "we both made mistakes. What matters is that we're here now, that we're talking now. The past is the past." He nodded, but I could see the regret in his eyes. 20 years was a long time to lose, and we both knew it. My command of 1st Battalion, 8th Marines began with the usual challenges of assuming leadership of a unit with established traditions and expectations. The battalion had recently returned from deployment to Iraq, and morale was complicated by the transition from combat operations to peacetime training. My predecessor had been a popular commander, and some of the senior enlisted Marines viewed my arrival with skepticism. Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert Thompson was my senior enlisted advisor, a career Marine with 4 combat deployments and a reputation for speaking his mind regardless of rank or consequences. During our first private meeting, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Colonel," he said, "these Marines have been through hell together. They've lost friends, they've seen combat, and they've learned to trust each other with their lives. What they want to know is whether they can trust you the same way. Master Guns? I replied, using his traditional nickname. I've commanded Marines in combat before. I've been where they've been, I've faced what they've faced, and I've brought my people home safely. But I don't expect them to take my word for it. I expect them to judge me by my actions, my decisions, and my commitment to their welfare and mission success. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Fair enough, Colonel, but understand that Marines talk, and word gets around fast. You'll have maybe 60 days to prove yourself before they make up their minds about whether you're the real deal or just another staff officer pretending to be a field commander. He was right about Marines talking, and the first few weeks of my command felt like living under a microscope. Every decision was analyzed, every interaction scrutinized for signs of weakness or indecision. I responded by doing what I'd always done, working harder and longer than everyone else, learning every aspect of the battalion's operations, and making myself visible to the Marines at every level. I started each day with physical training alongside the junior enlisted Marines, showing up at 0530 for 3-mile runs and calisthenics. I ate lunch in the enlisted mess hall, sitting with different groups and learning their names, their backgrounds, their concerns. I attended every field exercise, walking the training areas and observing operations firsthand rather than managing from a command post. The test came during a month-long training exercise at 29 Palms, the Marine Corps Desert Training Facility in California. The scenario involved urban combat operations, the kind of complex, close-quarters fighting that had characterized much of the recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. My battalion was tasked with clearing a mock city while facing a determined opposition force equipped with the latest training technology. On the third day of the exercise, Alpha Company found itself pinned down by simulated enemy fire in a particularly challenging section of the training area. The company commander, Captain Jennifer Walsh, was an experienced officer, but her Marines were struggling to advance against well-positioned defenders. The exercise controllers were growing impatient, and I could sense frustration building among my subordinate leaders. I made the decision to move forward to the company's position, not to take command but to assess the situation personally and provide guidance. Moving through the training area under simulated fire, I found Captain Walsh behind a concrete barrier, trying to coordinate her platoons while maintaining communication with battalion headquarters. "What's the situation, Captain?" I asked, taking cover beside her. "Ma'am, they've got overlapping fields of fire on our primary approach routes. Every time we try to advance, we take casualties. I'm considering pulling back and requesting artillery support." I studied the terrain, the enemy positions, the placement of her Marines. "What about the drainage ditch to the east? Can 2nd Platoon use that for concealment?" She followed my gaze, considering the option. "It's narrow, and they'd be exposed when they exit, but it would put them in position to enfilade the enemy's left flank." "Do it," I said. "I'll coordinate supporting fire from 3rd Platoon to keep their heads down while 2nd Platoon moves. You take 1st Platoon up the center as soon as you hear the flanking attack begin." The maneuver worked perfectly. Within 20 minutes, Alpha Company had cleared the objective with minimal simulated casualties, demonstrating the kind of tactical flexibility and leadership that the exercise was designed to test. But more important than the tactical success was the message it sent to my Marines. Their battalion commander was willing to share their risks and contribute to their success. Word of my forward deployment spread through the battalion within hours, as Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson had predicted it would. By the end of the exercise, the skepticism I'd sensed from the senior enlisted Marines had been replaced by something approaching acceptance. They didn't need to love me, but they needed to trust me, and trust was something that could only be earned through shared experience and demonstrated competence. 6 months into my command, we received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. The mission would involve training Afghan National Army units while conducting counterinsurgency operations in Helmand Province, the same area where I'd served as a platoon commander almost a decade earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was returning to where my leadership journey had begun, but now responsible for 800 Marines instead of 40. Preparing a battalion for deployment involves months of intensive training, equipment preparation, and family readiness programs. Every Marine must be qualified on their weapons, certified in their military occupational specialty, and prepared for the specific challenges they'll face in theater. As battalion commander, I was responsible not just for their military preparation, but for their emotional and psychological readiness as well. One of the most challenging aspects was dealing with Marines who were deploying for the first time, many of them barely out of high school, and facing the prospect of combat with a mixture of excitement and terror they didn't quite know how to process. During pre-deployment training, I made it a point to spend time with these young Marines, sharing stories from my own first deployment and helping them understand that fear was normal, even among seasoned combat veterans. "Colonel," one of them asked during a break in training, "what's it really like over there?" Private First Class Maria Santos was 19 years old, from a small town in New Mexico, and had joined the Marines to earn money for college. She was a good Marine, disciplined and dedicated, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "It's different for everyone," I told her honestly. "Sometimes it's boring, lots of waiting and routine patrols where nothing happens. Sometimes it's terrifying, and you have to make split-second decisions that can save lives or cost them. What I can tell you is that your training will take over when you need it to, and the Marines beside you will have your back no matter what." The deployment itself was everything I'd expected and prepared for. Long days, difficult decisions, and the constant weight of responsibility for the lives under my command. But it was also deeply satisfying in ways that staff assignments and peacetime training could never match. We were making a difference, training Afghan soldiers, disrupting Taliban operations, and protecting coalition forces throughout our area of responsibility. 4 months into the deployment, we received intelligence about a high-value Taliban commander operating in our sector. The mission to capture or eliminate him would require a complex night operation involving multiple companies, close air support, and precise timing. As battalion commander, I would normally coordinate the operation from our command post, but something about this particular mission made me decide to accompany the lead element. The target was a compound in a remote valley, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through terrain perfect for ambushes. Intelligence indicated that the commander would be meeting with local Taliban leaders, making it an opportunity to capture multiple high-priority targets in a single operation. The risk was significant, but so was the potential payoff. I joined Alpha Company for the insertion, moving through the darkness with night vision equipment and communications gear that kept me connected to all elements of the operation. The approach took 3 hours, moving carefully through terrain that could conceal enemy observers or improvised explosive devices. By 0200 hours, we were in position, around the target compound. The assault went perfectly for the first 10 minutes. Alpha Company breached the main entrance while Bravo Company secured the perimeter, and Charlie Company blocked potential escape routes. We captured the primary target and several associates, along with valuable intelligence materials. But as we prepared to extract, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Taliban reinforcements, apparently pre-positioned in the surrounding hills, opened fire on our perimeter positions with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. What had been a surgical raid suddenly became a desperate fight for survival. I found myself coordinating close air support while helping to organize the defense of our temporary position, using the compound walls for cover while directing fire and movement. The firefight lasted 45 minutes, though it felt like hours. 2 of my Marines were wounded, neither critically, but both requiring immediate medical evacuation. I coordinated helicopter support while maintaining communication with higher headquarters and ensuring that our prisoners remained secure. When the shooting finally stopped and we began our extraction, I realized that once again I'd found myself at the point of maximum danger, sharing the risks faced by the Marines under my command. The mission was deemed a complete success, yielding intelligence that led to several follow-on operations and significantly disrupting Taliban activities in our sector. But more important to me was the reaction of my Marines. Word had spread that the old lady, their nickname for me, spoken with affection rather than disrespect, had been in the thick of the fighting, coordinating air support while bullets snapped overhead. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson found me the next morning during my routine walkthrough of the battalion area. "Colonel," he said, "the Marines are talking about last night. They're saying you didn't have to go on that mission, that you could have stayed back and managed it from here." The extraction helicopter lifted off in a cloud of dust and diesel fumes, carrying our wounded Marines to safety while I remained behind to coordinate the follow-up operations. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's observation hung in the air between us like smoke from the still-cooling weapons. He was right, of course. Battalion commanders typically managed complex operations from secure command posts, connected to the action through radio communications and digital displays rather than personal experience. "Master Guns," I said, watching the helicopter disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, "leadership isn't about staying safe. It's about being where your Marines need you to be, when they need you to be there." He nodded slowly, understanding passing between us without further words needed. In that moment, I knew I'd crossed whatever invisible threshold had separated me from complete acceptance by the men and women under my command. The remaining months of our deployment passed with the rhythm of successful military operations, planned missions executed with precision, intelligence gathered and acted upon, enemy forces disrupted and captured. My battalion earned commendations from division headquarters and established a reputation for tactical excellence that would follow us long after we returned home. But more importantly, we'd forged the kind of unit cohesion that comes only from shared hardship and mutual trust. During our final week in Afghanistan, I received a message that would change everything. Orders to report to Headquarters Marine Corps in Washington upon completion of our deployment. Not for debriefing or routine administrative processing, but for assignment as Deputy Director of Operations, a position typically reserved for colonels being considered for promotion to Brigadier General. The message was brief, formal, and represented the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since those first uncertain days at Annapolis. The flight home was subdued, as homecomings often are for combat veterans. The relief of survival mixed with the strange sadness of leaving behind a place where every day had carried weight and meaning. My Marines were eager to return to families and civilian pursuits, but there was also an unspoken awareness that we were leaving behind something important, the clarity of purpose that comes with shared danger and mutual dependence. At the welcome home ceremony at Camp Pendleton, families filled the gymnasium with signs and balloons, tears and laughter. I stood at the podium, looking out at 800 Marines who'd followed me through 7 months of combat operations, and struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "You have served with honor," I told them. "You have protected each other, accomplished every mission, and represented the finest traditions of our Corps. I am proud to have commanded you, and I am grateful for the privilege of serving alongside you." My parents were there, sitting in the front row with other family members. My father wore his dress uniform, now properly fitted and updated with current ribbons, while my mother clutched a small American flag and wiped tears from her eyes. After the ceremony, as Marines reunited with their loved ones, my father approached me with the measured stride of a man still capable of military bearing despite his age and recent health challenges. "Colonel Rodriguez," he said formally, then broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in decades. "Welcome home, mija." The Spanish endearment, absent from our conversations for so many years, carried more weight than any medal or commendation. He embraced me carefully, mindful of my uniform and the formal setting, but with an emotion that spoke to years of regret and newfound pride. "Papa," I whispered into his shoulder, "thank you for coming." "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Not anymore. Never again." The assignment to Headquarters Marine Corps meant leaving the operational world I'd known for the strategic realm of policy and planning. My office in the Pentagon was a far cry from the austere conditions of forward operating bases, equipped with multiple computer screens, secure communication systems, and a view of the Potomac River that reminded me daily of how far I'd traveled from the desert valleys of Afghanistan. As Deputy Director of Operations, I was responsible for coordinating Marine Corps participation in joint military exercises, developing tactical doctrine for future conflicts, and serving as a liaison between operational commanders and senior Pentagon leadership. The work was intellectually challenging and strategically important, but it lacked the immediate satisfaction of field command. Instead of leading Marines directly, I was shaping the policies and procedures that would guide their actions for years to come. The position also meant regular interaction with flag officers, the generals and admirals who controlled the direction of American military policy. These were intimidating figures, men and women whose decisions affected thousands of service members and billions of dollars in resources. I discovered that success at this level required different skills than field command: the ability to synthesize complex information quickly, communicate effectively with civilian leaders, and navigate the political currents that influenced military decision-making. General Patricia Hayes, who'd spoken so encouragingly at my promotion ceremony, became an informal mentor during this period. She was now serving as Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, the second highest position in our service, and she made time in her schedule to provide guidance on the transition from operational to strategic leadership. "Elena," she said during one of our monthly mentoring sessions, "you've proven yourself as a tactical commander and an operational leader. Now you need to learn how to think strategically, how to influence policy rather than just implement it. The Marine Corps needs officers who can represent our interests at the highest levels of government, and that requires a different kind of courage than leading Marines in combat." Her words proved prophetic when I was selected to brief the Secretary of Defense on proposed changes to Marine Corps training doctrine. The briefing room was filled with senior officials, civilian and military, whose decisions shaped American defense policy worldwide. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that included cabinet-level appointees and four-star generals, and realized that everything I'd learned about leadership and communication was being tested in a new arena. The briefing went well, earning questions that demonstrated genuine interest and engagement from senior leadership. Afterward, the Secretary himself approached me. "Colonel Rodriguez," he said, "that was an excellent presentation. Clear, concise, and well-reasoned. I understand you're being considered for promotion to flag rank. Based on what I've seen today, I think that would be an excellent decision. The promotion process for general officers is lengthy and complex, involving multiple reviews and approvals at the highest levels of government. Unlike previous promotions, which had been largely internal Marine Corps decisions, advancement to brigadier general required approval from the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and ultimately the President of the United States. The process could take months, and there was no guarantee of success regardless of past performance. While waiting for the promotion decision, I continued my work at Headquarters Marine Corps, taking on additional responsibilities and special projects that demonstrated my capability for senior leadership. One such project involved developing new protocols for integrating female Marines into previously male-only combat specialties, work that drew on my own experiences while requiring careful attention to the concerns of traditionalists within the Corps. The assignment was politically sensitive, touching on issues of physical standards, unit cohesion, and military effectiveness that had been debated for decades. I approached it with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized my field commands, studying data from allied militaries, consulting with medical experts, and interviewing Marines of all ranks and specialties. My recommendations were measured and practical, focusing on maintaining rigorous standards while ensuring fair and equal opportunity for all qualified Marines. The report I submitted became the foundation for Corps-wide policy changes that were implemented over the following year, earning praise from both progressive and conservative voices within the military establishment. During this period, my relationship with my father continued to evolve in ways I'd never anticipated. He began calling regularly, asking about my work and sharing stories from his own military experience that he'd never discussed before. These conversations revealed a man far more complex than the rigid disciplinarian I'd known as a child, someone who'd carried his own doubts and struggles while maintaining the facade of certainty that military leadership often required. "Elena," he said during one of these calls, "I need to tell you something about why I was so hard on you when you wanted to join the military." I could hear him gathering courage for a confession that had been years in the making. "When I came back from Iraq, I was broken in ways I didn't understand. I'd lost Marines under my command, good men who died because of decisions I made. I couldn't bear the thought of you facing that kind of responsibility, that kind of potential for loss." "Papa," I replied gently, "I understand. But that responsibility, that risk, it's what gives service meaning. Without the possibility of sacrifice, there's no honor in what we do. He was quiet for a long moment before responding. You're right, of course. And you've handled that responsibility better than I ever did. I'm proud of you, Mija. Prouder than I ever knew how to say. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was reviewing intelligence reports in my Pentagon office. General Hayes' aide informed me that the commandant wanted to see me immediately, a summons that could mean anything from a new assignment to news about my promotion prospects. I walked through the corridors of Headquarters Marine Corps with the measured pace of someone trying to appear calm while anticipating news that could define the rest of my career. The commandant's office was an impressive space, filled with historical artifacts and portraits of previous Marine Corps leaders stretching back to the service's founding. General William Morrison was a combat veteran with multiple deployments and a reputation for direct communication that left little room for misinterpretation. He stood when I entered, returning my salute before gesturing toward the chairs arranged in front of his desk. Elena, he said, dropping the formality of rank in a way that immediately signaled the importance of our conversation. I have news about your promotion board. The decision has been made, and I wanted to tell you personally before it becomes official. The pause that followed felt endless, though it probably lasted only seconds. Congratulations, Brigadier General Rodriguez. Your promotion was approved unanimously, and your pinning ceremony is scheduled for next month. The words hit me like a physical force, years of preparation and ambition suddenly crystallizing into reality. I was going to be a general officer, one of the youngest in Marine Corps history, the first in my family and among the few women to achieve that rank in a service traditionally dominated by men. Thank you, sir, I managed, though the words felt inadequate to the magnitude of the moment. Elena, the commandant continued, this promotion comes with new responsibilities and challenges. You'll be commanding the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade, a position that will put you in charge of 14,000 Marines and sailors. It's one of our most important operational commands, and we're giving it to you because we believe you're the best officer for the job, regardless of gender or any other consideration. The 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade was indeed a significant command, responsible for training and deploying Marine units worldwide while maintaining readiness for rapid response to international crises. The position would make me one of the most senior operational commanders in the Marine Corps, with responsibilities that extended far beyond anything I'd previously experienced. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for December 15th, exactly 1 year after receiving that devastating text message from my father. The irony wasn't lost on me. What had begun as one of the worst days of my personal life was about to become one of the best days of my professional career. I sent invitations to family and friends, including a formal invitation to my parents that I hand-delivered during a visit to Phoenix. Brigadier General Rodriguez, my father said when I handed him the invitation, reading the words aloud as if to confirm their reality. My daughter, the general. His voice carried a mixture of pride and amazement that spoke to how far we'd both traveled from the days when he'd insisted that uniforms weren't for women. Papa, I said, I want you to know that every challenge you presented, every obstacle you put in my path made me stronger. I'm not grateful for the pain, but I'm grateful for the strength it taught me. He nodded, understanding the complexity of what I was trying to express. Your mother always said you were stronger than any storm. I just never learned how to appreciate the hurricane until it was too late. The weeks leading up to the promotion ceremony were filled with preparation and anticipation. The event would take place at Marine Barracks, Washington, the oldest active military installation in the United States, and the ceremonial heart of the Marine Corps. The historic setting seemed appropriate for a moment that represented both personal achievement and institutional progress. My parents arrived in Washington 3 days before the ceremony, staying at a hotel near the barracks and spending time touring the city while I managed final preparations for the event. My father was particularly interested in the military memorials and museums, studying the exhibits with the attention to detail that had characterized his approach to everything military throughout his career. The evening before the ceremony, we had dinner at a quiet restaurant in Georgetown, just the 3 of us sharing a meal without the pressure of formal events or official responsibilities. Elena, my mother said, raising her glass in a toast, tomorrow you become a general, but tonight you're still our daughter. We love you, and we're proud of the woman you've become. my father added his own words, speaking more freely than he had in years. Mija, I spent so many years trying to protect you from a world I thought would hurt you. I never realized that what you needed wasn't protection, but permission to be yourself. Tomorrow, when you put on that star, you're not just representing yourself or our family. You're showing every young woman that there are no limits to what they can achieve. The morning of December 15th dawned clear and cold, with a crisp wind that snapped the flags flying over Marine Barracks, Washington. I arrived early for final preparations, checking the details of the ceremony while trying to manage the nervous energy that had been building for weeks. The dress blue uniform felt different somehow, knowing that it would soon carry the single star that marked the transition from senior officer to general rank. The ceremony itself was precisely choreographed, a military ritual that honored both individual achievement and institutional continuity. Representatives from across the Marine Corps attended, along with family members and friends who'd supported my journey over the years. As I stood at attention waiting for the formal proceedings to begin, I could see my parents in the front row, my father in his dress uniform and my mother wearing a navy blue dress that complemented the military setting. General Morrison delivered remarks that placed my promotion in the context of Marine Corps history and values, speaking about leadership, sacrifice, and the evolving nature of military service in the 21st century. Brigadier General Rodriguez represents the best of our Corps, he said, an officer who has proven herself in combat, demonstrated excellence in command, and shown the character necessary for senior leadership. When the moment came to pin on my star, I chose to have my parents perform the ceremony rather than following the traditional protocol of having the promoting officer do the honors. My father approached with careful precision, his hands steady despite his age as he removed my colonel's eagles and replaced them with the single star of a brigadier general. My mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter achieve something that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. "Congratulations, General Rodriguez," my father said formally, then broke into a smile that transformed his entire face. "I'm proud to call you my daughter." The words carried 20 years of reconciliation, the final healing of wounds that had shaped both of our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. The reception following the ceremony was filled with congratulations and conversations about future responsibilities, but the moment that mattered most came when a young female Marine approached me during a quiet interval. Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez was fresh from recruit training, assigned to administrative duties at the barracks, while waiting for her permanent assignment. "Ma'am," she said nervously, "I wanted to thank you. My recruiter told me about your career and it's why I decided to join the Marines. Knowing that someone like me could become a general made me believe I could do anything." Her words reminded me why representation matters, why breaking barriers isn't just about personal achievement, but about opening doors for others to follow. Later that evening, as the formal events concluded and guests began to depart, I found myself alone with my parents in the quiet of the barracks courtyard. The December air was sharp with winter, but the sky was clear enough to see stars above the lights of Washington. We stood together in comfortable silence, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Elena," my father said finally, "I owe you an apology that's 20 years overdue. I let my own fears and limitations define what I thought was possible for you. I'm sorry for every door I tried to close, every dream I discouraged, every time I made you feel like you weren't enough." His voice carried the weight of genuine regret, but also the relief of finally speaking words that had been waiting for years. "Papa," I replied, "we both made choices we regret. What matters is that we're here now, together, celebrating something neither of us could have imagined when this journey began." I looked up at the stars, thinking about the young woman who'd left Phoenix with a single suitcase and a determination to prove herself worthy of something her father had insisted was impossible. "You know," my mother said softly, "when you were little you used to tell me you were going to be a general someday. I thought it was just childhood dreams, the kind of impossible ambition that fades with experience. I never imagined you'd actually do it." Her words brought back memories I'd nearly forgotten, moments when my ambitions had seemed like fantasy rather than achievable goals. The conversation continued as we walked slowly through the historic grounds of the barracks, past monuments and memorials that honored generations of Marines who'd served before us. The weight of tradition was palpable. The the sense of joining something larger than individual ambition or personal achievement. I was now part of a legacy that stretched back to the founding of the Republic, responsible for carrying forward values and traditions that had been tested in conflicts around the world. As we reached the parking area where my parents' rental car waited, my father turned to face me one final time. In the soft light from the street lamps, he looked older than his years but also somehow lighter, as if a burden he'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. "General Rodriguez," he said formally, then smiled and corrected himself. "Elena, my daughter, the General." I'll never get tired of saying that. The drive back to their hotel was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about the day's events and their significance. For me, the promotion represented not just professional achievement, but personal vindication, proof that the path I'd chosen despite his opposition had been the right one all along. For him, I suspected it represented something equally powerful, the realization that his daughter had become something greater than his own limitations could have imagined. As I returned to my quarters that night, still wearing the uniform with its new star, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the scared teenager who'd left home with her father's disapproval ringing in her ears, to the general officer who now commanded the respect of Marines across the Corps, the transformation had been complete, but not without cost. The text message that had started this particular chapter of my story still lived in my phone, a reminder of how far I'd traveled from that moment of rejection and pain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, the weight of command that comes with senior leadership in America's military forces. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, I felt the complete acceptance of the man whose approval had shaped so much of my early ambition. The next morning brought a return to routine responsibilities, but with the added weight of new rank and expanded duties. My office at Headquarters Marine Corps had been updated with the insignia and protocol appropriate to general officer status, small changes that reflected the magnitude of the transition I'd undergone. The work itself remained largely the same, but the level of responsibility and the scope of decision-making authority had expanded significantly. Within a week of my promotion, I received orders for my new assignment as Commanding General of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade, based at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. The position would require relocating from Washington and assuming command of one of the Marine Corps' most important operational units, responsible for maintaining readiness for rapid deployment anywhere in the world. The change of command ceremony was scheduled for February, giving me time to complete transition responsibilities at Headquarters Marine Corps, while preparing for the challenges of brigade command. The 2nd MEB was a complex organization, incorporating infantry, artillery, aviation, and logistics units that would deploy together as an integrated fighting force. The command would test every leadership skill I'd developed over nearly 2 decades of military service. Before leaving Washington, I made one final visit to Arlington National Cemetery, walking among the white headstones that marked the final resting places of American service members from conflicts spanning more than a century. The visit had become a personal tradition, a way of remembering the ultimate sacrifice that gave meaning to military service and the weight of responsibility that came with commanding others in potentially dangerous situations. Standing before the tomb of the unknown soldier, watching the precision and dedication of the honor guard, I thought about the Marines who would soon be under my command. Young men and women who'd volunteered to serve their country, trusting their leaders to use their lives wisely and well. The responsibility was humbling, a reminder that leadership at this level wasn't about personal achievement, but about service to something greater than individual ambition. The phone call from my father came that evening as I was packing my personal belongings for the move to Camp Lejeune. "Elena," he said, "I wanted to call before you take your new command. I know it's an important assignment, and I wanted you to know that your mother and I are proud of what you've accomplished." His voice carried a warmth that had been absent for so many years, the sound of a relationship finally healed after decades of misunderstanding. "Papa?" I replied, "Thank you. It means everything to have your support now, especially as I take on new responsibilities." We talked for nearly an hour, discussing the challenges of senior command and the weight of leading others in potentially dangerous situations. His own experience as a senior enlisted leader provided perspective on the human dimensions of military leadership that technical training could never fully capture. Remember, he said as our conversation drew to a close, leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or the one with all the answers. It's about making the hard decisions when they need to be made, and taking responsibility for the consequences. You've already proven you can do that, but the stakes get higher with each promotion. His words proved prophetic as I settled into my new role at Camp Lejeune. The 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade was indeed a complex organization, with multiple subordinate units spread across several installations and a mission set that required constant readiness for deployment worldwide. The Marines under my command included combat veterans from multiple deployments as well as young recruits experiencing their first assignment, a diverse group united by their commitment to Marine Corps values and standards. My first months as commanding general were spent learning the intricacies of the organization, meeting with subordinate commanders, and assessing the brigade's capabilities and challenges. The work was demanding but satisfying, combining the strategic thinking I'd developed at Headquarters Marine Corps with the operational focus that had always been my strength. The real test came 6 months into my command, when the brigade received orders for deployment to the Middle East as part of a larger operation aimed at countering terrorist activities in the region. The mission would require careful coordination with allied forces, integration with other service components, and the kind of complex logistics that characterized modern military operations. Planning for the deployment consumed weeks of intensive work, involving everything from personnel assignments and equipment loading to family readiness programs and media relations. As commanding general, I was responsible not just for the military aspects of the operation, but for the welfare of 14,000 Marines and sailors whose lives would be affected by every decision I made. The deployment preparation reached its final stages just as December approached, bringing with it the familiar ache of holidays spent away from family. This would be my first Christmas as a general officer, and the irony wasn't lost on me that exactly 2 years earlier I'd received that crushing text message from my father. Now, as I stood in the brigade command center coordinating final logistics for our Middle East deployment, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. This time it was my mother. "Elena, your father wants to visit the base before you deploy. He has something important to tell you." The message was brief but carried an urgency I'd rarely heard from her. Within hours, my parents were driving the 12 hours from Phoenix to Camp Lejeune, arriving just as the first winter storm of the season began blanketing North Carolina in snow. They found me in my office late that evening, still reviewing deployment orders and ensuring every detail was properly coordinated. My father looked older somehow, the years and his health scare having left their mark, but his bearing remained unmistakably military. He wore his dress uniform again, cleaned and pressed with the same attention to detail he'd maintained throughout his career. "Elena," he said formally, "I need to tell you something before you leave. Something I should have said years ago." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small wooden box, weathered with age and handling. "This belonged to my father, your grandfather. He carried it through World War II, and I carried it through Iraq. I always intended to pass it down to my son, but I never had one." He opened the box to reveal a small silver medallion, tarnished with age but clearly precious. "It's St. Michael, the patron saint of warriors. My father told me it would keep me safe as long as I served with honor. It did, and it kept me safe too." His voice caught slightly as he continued. "I want you to have it, not because you need protection, but because you've earned the right to carry our family's tradition forward." The medallion was small but heavy in my palm, carrying the weight of 3 generations of military service. "Papa," I whispered, "are you sure? This has been with you through everything." He nodded firmly. "You're a better soldier than either of us ever were. If anyone deserves to carry it, it's you." As he fastened the chain around my neck, his hands shook slightly with emotion. "Elena, I was wrong about everything. About women in the military, about your capabilities, about what it means to serve. You've shown me that courage has no gender, that leadership comes from character, not from conforming to someone else's expectations." My mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched this moment of reconciliation that had been years in the making. "Maija," she said softly, "your father has been carrying guilt about his treatment of you for so long. He's so proud of what you've become, but he's also sorry for the pain he caused along the way. The deployment orders came through the next morning, requiring our departure within 72 hours. The accelerated timeline meant frantic final preparations, but it also meant that my parents would be present for the send-off ceremony. As commanding general, I would be among the last to board the aircraft, ensuring that every Marine under my command was properly accounted for and ready for the mission ahead. The ceremony took place on a bitter December morning, with families gathered despite the cold to bid farewell to their Marines. I stood at the podium, looking out at 14,000 faces that represented not just military personnel but sons, daughters, husbands, wives, parents, and children, who were voluntarily placing themselves in harm's way for their country. Marines, I began, my voice carrying across the assembled formation, we deploy today not as individuals but as a team, not for personal glory but for the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. We carry with us the prayers and hopes of our families, the expectations of our nation, and the traditions of those who served before us. As I spoke, I could see my parents in the family section. My father standing at attention despite his civilian clothes, my mother clutching the small flag she'd brought to every military ceremony I'd ever participated in. The sight of them there, supporting rather than opposing my service, felt like the completion of a circle that had been broken for far too long. The actual deployment went smoothly, a testament to months of careful planning and the professionalism of the Marines under my command. We established our forward operating base in Jordan, a strategic location that allowed us to coordinate with regional allies while maintaining the capability to respond rapidly to emerging threats throughout the Middle East. The mission itself proved to be everything we'd trained for: complex, demanding, and vital to regional stability. My brigade worked closely with Jordanian forces, training their personnel while conducting operations against terrorist networks that threatened both local populations and international security. The work was dangerous but important, the kind of mission that justified the years of preparation and sacrifice that military service required. 3 months into the deployment, we received intelligence about a major terrorist gathering in a remote border region. The operation to disrupt this meeting would require careful coordination between multiple allied forces, precise timing, and the kind of leadership that could adapt quickly to changing circumstances on the ground. I chose to accompany the lead elements personally, not because my presence was required but because the complexity of the operation demanded command presence at the point of action. The mission involved a night insertion by helicopter, followed by a dawn assault on a heavily defended compound. Intelligence indicated that senior terrorist leaders from multiple organizations would be present, making it a target of strategic importance. The assault itself went according to plan for the first hour. My Marines performed with the precision and courage that characterized their training, capturing multiple high-value targets while securing valuable intelligence materials. But as we prepared to extract, the situation became complicated by the arrival of reinforcements and the need to coordinate with allied forces who were facing their own challenges in adjacent sectors. Standing in the command post we'd established in the captured compound, I found myself coordinating air support, ground movements, and intelligence collection while maintaining communication with higher headquarters. The complexity of the operation tested every leadership skill I'd developed over 2 decades of military service, requiring split-second decisions that could affect not just the mission's success but the lives of hundreds of allied personnel. The operation was ultimately successful, yielding intelligence that led to the disruption of terrorist networks across the region. But more importantly for me personally, it demonstrated that I could command effectively at the general officer level, making strategic decisions under pressure, while maintaining the tactical awareness that effective military leadership required. The phone call from home came 2 weeks later, as I was reviewing after-action reports in my temporary office at the forward operating base. My aide handed me the encrypted phone with a somber expression that immediately commanded my attention. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "it's about your father." My mother's voice was strained but controlled when she came on the line. "Elena, your father had another heart attack. He's stable now, but the doctors say it was severe. He's been asking for you." The words hit me like physical blows, the sudden realization that despite our reconciliation, time was still limited and precious. I'll be there as soon as possible, I told her, already calculating travel times and command transition procedures. Tell him to hang on, that his general is coming home. Within 18 hours, I was on a military transport aircraft heading back to the United States, having temporarily transferred command to my deputy while dealing with what could be a family emergency. The hospital in Phoenix was the same one where I'd maintained vigil during his first heart attack, but this time felt different somehow. More urgent, more final. Laden with the weight of conversations that still needed to happen, and time that might be running out. I found my mother in the same waiting room, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "How is he?" I asked, still wearing my combat uniform from the hasty departure from Jordan. "Weak," she replied, "but conscious. The doctors say the next 24 hours will be critical." We sat together in the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to increase rather than relieve anxiety, waiting for permission to see him. When the nurse finally allowed us into his room, I was shocked by how much he'd deteriorated in just a few months. The man who'd seemed so strong at my promotion ceremony now looked small and vulnerable, connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat and breath. But his eyes were alert when they found mine, and he managed a weak smile. "General Rodriguez," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the mechanical sounds of the medical equipment. "You came back." "Of course I came back, Papa," I said, taking his hand carefully. "Marines don't leave anyone behind, especially family." He squeezed my hand with what strength he had remaining. "Elena, I need you to know that watching you become a general, seeing you command respect from everyone around you has been the greatest honor of my life. I'm sorry I was too stupid and stubborn to see your potential when it mattered most." "Papa," I replied, "you gave me the strength to prove myself, even if that wasn't your intention. Every obstacle you put in my path made me more determined to succeed. In a strange way, your opposition helped create the officer I became." We talked quietly for the next hour, covering ground that had been left unexplored for too many years. He told me about his own struggles with the transition from military to civilian life, the challenges of defining himself outside the structure and purpose that military service provided. I shared stories from my deployment, the daily realities of commanding Marines in combat, and the weight of responsibility that came with senior leadership. "You know," he said as visiting hours drew to a close, "the proudest moment of my life wasn't my own promotion or any medal I received. It was watching you walk down that aisle in your dress blues, surrounded by Marines who respected you enough to stand without being ordered to do so. That's when I finally understood what I'd been too blind to see for so many years." The crisis passed over the following week, his condition stabilizing enough for me to return to my deployment with cautious optimism about his recovery. But the experience had reinforced how precious and unpredictable time could be, how important it was to cherish relationships while the opportunity still existed. The remaining months of our deployment proceeded without major incident, our mission contributing to regional stability, while providing valuable training for both American and Allied forces. When the time came to redeploy home, I felt the familiar mixture of relief and sadness that characterized the end of successful military operations. The homecoming ceremony at Camp Lejeune was everything such events should be: joyful, emotional, and deeply meaningful for the families who'd endured months of separation and worry. As I stood before the assembled Marines and their loved ones, I was struck by the realization that this might be my final deployment as a field commander, that future assignments would likely be more strategic and less operational in nature. My parents were there again, my father looking healthier but still fragile, my mother beaming with the pride of a woman whose daughter had successfully led thousands of Marines through a complex and dangerous mission. After the formal ceremony concluded and Marines began reuniting with their families, my father approached me with the slow but determined pace of someone fighting against physical limitations. "General Rodriguez," he said formally, then broke into the smile that had become familiar over the past year. "Welcome home, mija. The whole family is proud of what you've accomplished." Behind him stood cousins, aunts, and uncles who'd driven from across the Southwest to be present for my return, family members who'd watched my career from a distance but were now eager to claim connection to their famous relative. But the moment that mattered most came when my father straightened to his full height, despite the obvious effort it required, and rendered a perfect military salute. "Colonel Martinez, ma'am," he said clearly, using the name that honored both my achievement and our family heritage. The words carried years of reconciliation, decades of misunderstanding finally resolved into mutual respect and love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.